This is my first video editing tutorial. We're going to be going from Lightroom into Photoshop, and we're going to cover some kind of advanced stuff, but I'm going to try to be as thorough as I can, and hopefully I can teach you guys something. So this is the final image. This is just a JPEG. It's a photo I took in Montauk Point about a week and a half ago. It was sunrise. It was a good morning. I was the only person there. It was peaceful and serene. But because it's a seascape, there's factors that you got to consider, such as your tripod sinking into the sand, which was an issue I had to deal with. So made bracketing and taking multiple images in the exact same composition kind of difficult. So we're going to be doing some blending and aligning to get the images to line up. But yeah, let's get started. So this is actually 3 images. If you were to draw a line from across the horizon, down is 1 image, and if you were to, everything else is basically 2. This is I could have very easily just done this image. But one of the problems with shooting with a wide angle lens, this is 23 millimeters. One of the problems is stuff in the foreground, that's background, becomes really small and loses its sense of scale. It's part of the lens distortion. So to combat that, there's something called focal length blending. So you take one shot zoomed out at 23 millimeters, and then you take another shot zoomed in on the subject. Like I said before, there were issues to deal with, and so these are not perfect. And I'm going to show you how I worked with what I had to make it work. I'll show you this image here is more zoomed in. It's at 35 millimeters and same composition, just zoomed in. But when you zoom in and take a closer look, I don't know if you can see it on YouTube, it's out of focus a little bit, just a little, but enough that it bothered me. And I had this other image, which is terrible. The horizon's crooked. The subject is in the top. It should be centered, but this is what I had, and I was able to make it work. So we're gonna take these 3 images. We're gonna edit them in Lightroom, all the same, and then we'll bring them into Photoshop, and I'll show you how to blend them together. I don't have a recipe for every image. I have a few things that I like to do the same for almost every image, but for the most part, it's all different depending on the image. So to get started, we'll do in the basic panel in Lightroom. I shoot a Sony A7R2. I have a lot of dynamic range that I can pull from, but I always pull the highlights down. I don't worry about any image quality loss from playing with these sliders with this camera. That being said, I don't try to go too far with the shadow slider because it starts to get a little dry and HDR looking. It loses a lot of its contrast. So we'll stick it right at about 20. Whites is a great slider. It's really easy to blow your highlights with this one, but it also can saturate and add contrast really easily with the white slider. So bring that up to around 31. We don't want it to clip or anything. I actually may pull this even further down, and you can see this is your histogram up here. This is the right side of the histogram is your whites, the left side is your darks, and everything in the middle. And you can actually, for example, if you're clipping if you want to adjust the highlights, you can actually click on it and drag it around, and it'll move the sliders to adjust the histogram. But we're not going to do that. All right, so this is something I learned kind of recently. Normally I didn't ever raised the black slider to the positive, or it was rare that I did, but now instead of raising the shadows to 70 or 80, I raise the shadows to, wherever I was before, 20, 15, something like that. And I'll raise the black slider as well, and that helps protect the darkest parts of the image, in here. And I mean, the rock is basically black back there, so it's okay if we're losing a tiny bit there. Clarity, I know I had a clarity phase, and I know everybody else probably has one. Maybe you're in it now, but I used to gank that thing up all the way. Now I usually don't go above 10. I like 10. It's just enough to add some extra detail and micro contrast. Vibrance and saturation, I know now that when I go into Photoshop, when I start adding layers, the image will become more saturated. So you want to keep that in mind before you go in there, and you want to make sure you don't, because if you saturate it now, you won't be able to fix it later as easily. So we're going to leave the vibrance and saturation alone. If you wanted to put a little vibrance on, you could, but I generally stay away from these if I plan on going into Photoshop. And that's the important thing here, is that we are going to be going into Photoshop. If you're just editing in Lightroom, then you can, a totally different set of rules apply. For me and my workflow, I like to get the image to be as flat as I can. Not as flat as I can, but I want it to be flat before I go into Photoshop, and then in Photoshop is where I make it contrasty and saturate it and do those things. Lightroom is just to get all the lights and darks corrected and make sure all the information is there. That being said, I kind of want to play with the white balance a little bit. Let's see. Just a little warmth around there. Looks good. We're going to leave the contrast alone. Sometimes I add a little, but usually I don't. Now we're going to go down into... I normally have this on solo mode. There we go. And it's just a less cluttered workspace. So we're going to be in the tone curve section next. And you can play with the S-curve if you like, but personally I like using the sliders. Sometimes I do the S-curve when it's astrophotography, but for basic landscapes I just do the sliders. And again, there is no one recipe for this. I do like usually putting highlights and lights in opposite directions, but that's not always the case. So we're going to do about plus 20 and minus 20, let's say. You can see it's bringing up the sky nicely. And next we're going to pull up some darks more, because we want to get all the information like in here. So you got to be gentle with these sliders. They can very easily wash out your image. So the darks and the shadows are going to be kind of handle the dark parts of the images differently. Both do a pretty good job of bringing out the darkest parts of the images. All right. And I'm pretty happy with that. So one thing I like to do as far as color, I talked about saturation, but this is not so much, yes, it's saturating the images, but it's doing it in a different way. If you go down to camera calibration, I like to, not always, but sometimes I slide the blue slider all the way to the right. As you can see, it made parts of this image too blue, but it did nice things to the other parts of the image that aren't blue. For example, the red on the lighthouse, or the sand and the oranges. I like what it's done. But the blues are gone, or they're too far. So we're going to go into the HSL panel, and we're going to pull down the blues and let's say, I don't know, about 15. This is one recipe for me in the HSL, as I usually always play with the blues. I will bring this down to, I don't know, 15 to 20 or so. Depends on the blues and the images. And then I'll go into the hue part and I'll bring that up and I will slide the blues towards purple a little bit. Let's say 14. Looks good to me. And I don't usually do split toning, but I did for this image. I felt it was too blue, and yes, I could go and warm this image up to get rid of some of the blues, but I'm losing a lot of the color that I like when I do that. So in this image, I did do split toning. I wanted to really get the pinks and the purples to show through, and get the blue hour feel, like the sun is just below the horizon, about to pop up. So we're gonna take this guy and we're gonna bring it to about there, and I usually don't go above 15 or so for this. So that's the highlights right there, and it's done a nice job of adding some nice soft pink light. The shadows, we're gonna keep those kind of blue as well. Let's see, right about more. Alright, I like that. Alright, detail, I don't know if Lightroom's changed their algorithm. I know a while ago that doing sharpening last is a good workflow, because when you sharpen the image, it slows down Lightroom or any of the editing. So I do save that for last usually. Lens corrections, I by default on import, I have it set up so it enables profile corrections, but I don't think I want that for this image. I kind of want the vignetting that it does, because the focal point is, right around here, and I like the framing with the vignetting, and I can add it, using these sliders. There's lots of ways to add vignetting, but I like the way it does it right in camera. Definitely want to have remove chromatic aberration checked, and let's see, I think we're basically done for Lightroom for this image. Let's see, anything else I want to do? I don't think so. Alright, so we're gonna drag, highlight the 3 images, sync them, bang, all 3 images are edited the same, and now we're gonna go edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Give it a minute while it gets ready. My computer isn't that old, but it's running slow today. I am editing on a Wacom tablet. Everybody seems to tell you that in their tutorials, so I'm going to tell you in mine. It takes getting used to, but once you're used to it, it changes everything. I mean, for the real local and controlled adjustments that we're going to be doing to be able to control your pen pressure with a Wacom tablet is really helpful. So, alright, so here's the fun part. So what we're going to do is this image, we're going to use the Lighthouse for. And this image, we're going to use the sky for. Because I totally messed... Where is it? This one. I totally messed this one up. But the Lighthouse is sharp, and that's what I need. Whereas the other image... Sorry, I know I'm confusing you with all my layers here. Let me make these bigger. Where is it? we go. That's better. Okay. So this one was out of focus, but we can use the sky from this image because the sky doesn't really need to be in focus. And so we're going to make this image as the sky, and we're going to take the lighthouse from this image, and we're going to blend them together. And it's going to take some finagling. It's not something I normally do. Focal blending, yes, but salvaging 3 images that none are perfect, no, I don't normally do that. All right, so turn off. I'm gonna make, just to make things clear to you guys, I'm gonna make the 2 images that are gonna be used for the background red, and we're gonna make the foreground image green. So this green one is, let's say, our base image. We're going to be working off of this and adding to it. So let's see. All right, we're going to turn this crooked layer on. I'm going to hit Command T to transform it. We're going to lower the opacity just so we can see where everything is, and we're going to bring it right down over the other lighthouse, and you'll see what's happening in a minute. So this is not something you can do for every image. It'll look unnatural for certain images, but it is more, this focal length blending is way more accurate to what we see when we're standing there. The lighthouse was not a million miles away. It was actually a lot closer than the image made it look. So now we're going to bump this back up, and we're going to add a mask to it. So if you don't know, white reveals, black conceals. That's the way masks work. With our brush tool, you could hit B, and I don't know if you know this trick, but on a Mac, which I'm using, Control Option and sliding the tip or your mouse or your Wacom tip will change the brush size if you go left to right, and if you go up and down, it changes the hardness. Before that, I was using bracket keys, which work great, but I find this to be a lot faster, and I got a lot more control, especially when you start doing lots of masks. All right, so we need to get rid of a lot of this image because we're just using the lighthouse on this top image. So we're going to make our layer, our paintbrush black, which you can change through X if you hit X. And we're going to do a medium hardness, and let's do 100% opacity. And if you to change the opacity up here, yes, you can come up here and drag the slider, but you could also hit 6 on your keyboard and, well, hold on. If you're not clicked into the box, let's say. So bear with me a second. All right. So if I hit 5, my opacity has now changed to 50. If I hit 9, it's up to 90%, and 0 is 100%. So if you just hit 0 or any of the numbers, you can change the the opacity of your brush. So we're at 100, black brush. Make sure you click on the layer mask. A lot of times Photoshop will snap me back onto this layer, and I'll end up drawing on the layer and not realize it and have to go back and fix it. It's a pain in the ass. So just always make sure that you're on the layer mask. All right, now we're gonna come in here and we're just gonna get rid of the foreground. And we're gonna get rid of that too. so the important part of this image where you gotta really watch. Oh shoot, you know what I forgot that I want to show you guys is we're gonna go back a couple steps. I went to free transform. This is when I was lining it up over here. So I'm gonna raise the opacity back up so you can see this. But right now the horizon is horizontal the way it should be, but because of the lens distortion and the fact that the lighthouse is on the top, the very top part of the frame, it's distorted and it's leaning to the left, which is not a very appealing look. So we're gonna go back into transform, and you can right click and you get all these options: scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective, whatever. But if you hold down command and you get a white and put your mouse over the corner, when you press command, there's a little white arrow that pops up. Click on the corners and you're able to drag them in and you're able to distort the image. Before I do that, we're going to click on the ruler on the left side and we're going to drag a straight line here to help make sure that our lighthouse is actually vertical. So we're going to come in. And we're still a little off here. This just takes finagling. You know, I usually don't. I usually try to push the image into itself to correct distortion, but because I'm not, and I try not to pull it out like this because you're stretching pixels as opposed to compressing them. But because we're not using the bottom of this image, I don't really care about stretching it that much. Alright. That's good enough for government work, I think. Let's see. That looks pretty close. Let me change the opacity. Wow, my computer's running really slow. Alright, now we gotta adjust it again. Move it down. I'm just hitting the down arrow right now. Do really minor movements. And we're going to rotate it here. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's pump the opacity back up. Make sure that everything's straight. Doesn't it looks kind of like the lighthouse is leaning. Yeah, we're not there yet. So we're going to make some more adjustments. This stuff, doing these distort and warp and all that stuff really comes down to your graphics card, and if you have a good one. I thought mine was decent, but I think it's the video. I think because I'm recording video, it's hating it right now, which makes this a little more difficult. Okay. Lighthouse is straight. Finally. Alright. I'm going to hit enter. Lock it in. Alright. Now I'm going to get rid of these guys. If you just go to the move tool over here and click on them and drag them back out of the frame. They'll disappear. All right. Now we're going to make the mask, and hopefully this time everything works. And I mean, with a couple very quick brush strokes, I mean, you can see it's starting to take shape. Don't worry about the sky yet. We're going to worry about that next. Up here is where you got to focus, because this is where the transition happens. So we want to make sure that there's no like ghosting or, you know, parts where the opacity is not correct, and like you get, let's say, a rock, the same rock in two different spots. So we're gonna come through and whoops, switch it back to black, and we're gonna come through, and it's easy when you have a line you can work off of. So for example, this like rock wall, I'm gonna use that as my line that defines one image to the next. So whoop, sometimes it's easy to not realize what brush you're on. Alright, we're getting there. It's starting to look the way I want it to. Sorry, it's not the most exciting thing to watch, but doesn't mean it's not important. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, now we're going to work on this other image, which is the sky. So we're going to go Command T to transform. We want to make sure our opacity is down, that way we kind of line it up with what we want. And bring that up a little bit more. So here's where it's going to get tricky, and ideally you wouldn't need to have this third image. Ideally you could just use one image for the foreground, one image for the background. Again, because I lost focus, I have to finagle it like I am. So when this is put in, the challenge is going to be blending the sky from this image into this image. I could overlay them and line up the lighthouses on top of one another, like so they're aligned, and just leave the lighthouse from this image, but I think that's actually going to be more complicated than what I'm suggesting. So I just put a black layer mask on it. We're going to go with a white brush, 100% opacity, and we're going to paint it in. Don't worry about this little spot here. I'll fix that. So if we can get most of it correctly, blended, like the fact that this lighthouse is here doesn't matter. We can content aware fill, clone stamp, whatever. We'll get rid of it because the lighthouse is so close to the edge of the image that I don't have a lot of room to work with here. So it's just gonna take some finagling. I know I keep using that word, finagle. Because I had a soft opacity brush, I went into the lighthouse a little bit, and so now I'm just coming in here and cleaning up where it bled over. So this little antenna, or whatever, tip of the lighthouse, one little trick, if you don't know it, is to, with your brush, works better with a mouse for this one, but you click, let go, and then hold down shift and click again, and it'll draw a straight line between the two spots. Not sure if I like how that's looking though, but we'll see. Yeah, that looks fine. Good enough for government work. Alright, now we're going to get rid of this thing. Before I do that, I just want to look through the image and make sure that there's nothing I'm missing. That might be Block Island on the horizon. Didn't realize that was in the picture. Alright, brush 0. If you look on the mask, there's a little spot right here. We're gonna kind of clean that up. We got something going on here. Let's take a look. Switch layers. There we go. Let's see if that works. No, I don't like that. And I'm switching back to my mouse because I'm going to do that same trick. I'm going to give it a pretty hard edge. Click. That didn't work. Oh, I see. Bear with me. Maybe I will do it by hand, actually, because I feel like I can do it a little more free form. I'm going to change the opacity, just kind of blend it in. we got a little something going on here. Alright, I'm happy with that. Sorry, that took a little bit longer than I thought, but alright, now to do the final fixes, we're gonna, I should have mentioned this. If you don't use this TK Actions panel, highly recommend it. Really took my editing to the next level, and it forced me to challenge myself and learn something new, which can be good or bad depending on your taste, but the power of Tony Kuiper's TK Actions is unbelievable. There are other photographers out there that have their own panels. Jimmy McIntyre, Tony Kuiper, I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank on the other people, but all the panels are good. They all essentially allow you to do the same thing. TK is probably the most advanced, but not by much. You're splitting hairs at that point. All right, so I'll try not to. These are shortcuts over here in the bottom right. Like levels, curves, brightness, hue, saturation, color balance. So if I hit any of these, it'll give me a layer. Levels, bang. It's the same thing as going into here and saying levels. It's just one click as opposed to two. All right, so we're gonna highlight these all, and we're gonna do Command Option E. and that's merge visible. Stamp visible, and so it merges these 3 layers and gives you a new layer. This layer is the layer that we're gonna go in and fix up this little bit right here. So, I mean, you can see the difference in focus. This is in focus. That's not. I mean, whatever. All right, we're gonna try doing a content aware fill first. Oh, let me get my feather down to 0. Sorry, one more time. So yeah, if you right click and you go to fill, right click, fill, and you get these options. You're going to want to go to content aware fill. Alright, okay. And it didn't do it. See this funny line going through it? Not a big deal. We can fix that. I'm going to go back though. We can now try a cool tool that I like to use sometimes. Doesn't always do the trick, is patch. So we're going to draw around our selection or what we need to fix. That wasn't a good job. Oh my god, come on. Okay, that's my monitor calibrator telling me I need to calibrate my monitor again. Alright, now we got a selection. We're gonna click on it and drag it over to the right, let's say. You're going to want to find a similar spot with the same color, pattern, whatever. Now we hit deselect, and it's pretty much a seamless transition right there. I would imagine nobody else could see it. Somebody who doesn't know it was there won't be able to see it. I still can, so I'm going to go and use my clone stamp and just touch up a little bit, maybe at 50% opacity, and all right. Let's see. Okay. Good. Now, we gotta fix this little bit on top. Easy to do. We're just gonna go into the crop tool, and we're gonna drag it down, and we're gonna pull this up because I want the line that this water causes, I want that to be in the corner. And the idea is that I want the viewer's eye to start here and kind of S-curve up to the lighthouse. So leaving out this extra bit on the bottom, I mean, there's nothing there that adds to my composition. I guess you can make the argument, no, I really don't think it adds to it at all. So I'm going to delete it. It's my photo. Alright, and we're going to pull this down. And I know a lot of you are forced to deal with Instagram's unfortunate crop ratio of 4:5. It's actually a pretty nice ratio when printing vertically, or doing any photo vertically. It doesn't have to be printed. It's a little less long and it's a little more pleasing on the eye, I think. When you have the full crop or the full photo going vertical, you're kind of reading the photo and tilting your head upwards, whereas this is a little more closer to square. So now we're gonna do delete cropped pic. Make sure. Why is my oops? Shit. Right, delete cropped pixels. You're gonna want to make sure that's checked because that's gonna get rid of all this extra junk that's outside of the frame. And hit enter. All right, there we go. Now I'm going to take these 3 original images, and for now I'm going to save them just in case I have to backtrack, but I'll put them in a group, and I will eventually delete them because I don't need my file size to be any larger than it's going to be. No. Blend. Alright, so now this has become our original photo. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Nik Collection. It's a outdated program, but it still contains some very powerful tools. Color Effects Pro is a favorite for a lot of photographers. You can download it for free, I believe, still, and if somebody DP Review just bought Nik, and they're going to be coming out with a new version this year. So I don't know how much longer it's going to be for free. Get your hands on it while you can. Alright, so we're going to do a little Pro Contrast first. Pro Contrast is just another way of doing micro contrast. It's similar to like clarity, tonal contrast, or it's just a different algorithm that gives you contrast. I almost always apply it to my images, dynamic contrast, and I usually don't go above 20 tops, but usually around 15 or something like that. And if you check this little box, you can see what it did. It doesn't do very much, but it's subtle, and it does bring out some detail. If you feel that this image is a little too blue right now, you could go to correct color cast, and you can slide it up, and it'll make it a little more warmer. Correct color cast can be really helpful in real estate photography, where you got funny the walls on an interior are yellow and they should be white or something. It works really well for that. And we're going to add another filter, and I like to add some brilliance and warmth. And again, most of these adjustments are pretty subtle. We'll try 19 seems actually pretty good. What it did is basically add some magenta and warm colors to the image. Kind of fakes the sunlight color that you'd see. For now, I think we're gonna just leave it at that. There's loads of filters here, by the way. I just had architecture selected, but landscape, there's a bunch. Some are terrible, and you're gonna have no use for them whatsoever. Some are really helpful. So, we're gonna hit OK. Alright. Before, after. Before, after. I like it. Alright, next I'm gonna come down here and click the levels button, which is gonna give me a levels layer. You can go in here and hit levels. And what the magic of TK, Tony Kuiper's action mask, is luminosity masks, and these numbers here correspond to different dark values, light values, and midtones in the middle here. So 1 through 6 are darks, 1 through 6 are lights, and this is midtones 1, 2, and 3. You can also come into here and select different colors, and what it does is it makes a mask. It'll the whole thing. Black conceals, white reveals. You'll see what happens, and so I usually like to start off with a midtones levels adjustment, and I'm gonna just show you some of these and what the masks look like first, I guess. So we'll do a dark mask, and so this is selecting the lightest of the dark values, and then as we go to the left, there's less and less selections being made of the dark until you get to the very, very darkest parts of the picture. So like dark 6 is only showing us a piece of that rock there, a piece of this rock here, just the darkest shadows in the picture. Darks 1 is showing us almost everything. And now we'll go into lights, and so if we hit lights 4, this is just showing the lightest part of the picture, and if you look at the picture and say, what's the lightest part? It's this right here. These masks allow you to make really precise selections on a pixel level. There's no hard edges or hard lines. Everything is smooth and almost transition free. So midtones. So we're going to click on the levels here, and we're going to do midtones 2. And right now it includes, the midtones include a lot of the darks and a lot of the highlights, but it doesn't include the brightest of the highlights and the darkest of the darks. And so it leaves those out. And a lot of times when you make, I'm going to hit apply, and it'll apply right here is where this selection, this mask is now, when I hit apply, it transfers it over onto the levels layer. So let's say we didn't have the mask and we were just doing the levels layer. The moment you start adjusting stuff, and especially with the white slider or the dark slider, you start to get a lot, like you clip the blacks almost instantly. And you can, not in this image, but you can clip the whites pretty quickly too. But when you have the midtone selected, it's protecting the brights, and it's protecting the darks. And so I'm gonna take this and go to the right. I usually don't go further than 6D tops with the midtone slider, and then we're going to take the whites and we're going to bring it to the left. And what that does is, yes, it adds contrast, but it also saturates the image in a very nice, pleasing way. It's not taking the saturation slider and just jacking it up. It's a very natural way of saturating an image. So that's why in the beginning in Lightroom I told you that I don't use the vibrance and saturation sliders very often, because I do adjustments like this that saturate the image naturally. If for some reason, like if we wanted to add darks here, like get some more the image a little darker, we can, but we will start to clip eventually. This is not just because it's a mid-tone selection. That's not to say that you'll never clip the highlights or never clip the darks. You still have to be aware of them. But if you did want to add some dark to it, you can, and you want to be careful of clipping, you can then go to the output slider on the dark end and slide it up just a little bit. And I don't know if you could see it in YouTube, but it raises the shadows again. It can make it pretty washed out if you go far, so you really want to be subtle with that. But I like it. I think that's let's see, before, after, really nice. All right, now Not sure if you're familiar with dodging and burning or not, but there's lots of different ways to dodge and burn. I do it two ways. I will do it with a levels layer, and I will also do it with a dodging and burning layer. So for now, we're gonna do a levels layer. We made a new levels layer. We're gonna go in here, and I want to get these white lines that are formed in the water. I want to get them to be a little more pronounced, pop a little more. I really do want those to be the thing that leads you into the picture. So this right here. So we're gonna take the whites, and we're gonna ignore almost, like, whatever happens up in the sky right now doesn't matter. We're not focused on that. We're just focused on down here. So the fact that it's clipping up there and becoming blown out is okay. So now we got a nice white there, and I want to pull it back a little. So now we're going to go to the mask. We're going to hit invert, Command I. That will make it dark, and now you can't see anything. And I'm going to try to do this freehand first. With a brush, we're going to come in with a white brush, low opacity, let's say 30 or 40%. Soft brush as well, and we're going to just brush it in. I could make a selection of these brights using luminosity masks, but sometimes it's more fun to do it freehand. Alright, so because we're adding contrast, it's saturating it a lot. The water is becoming a little too blue. It was definitely more white. And so what you can do is in your layers, if you don't want it to get saturated, you can change your blending option to luminosity, and that will protect the colors and will just add contrast without the image getting saturated. So that's a little more like it. And in the meantime, I'm gonna hold shift and click on the mask and just look around and see if there's any other places that I want to lighten using using the levels adjustment. I think I will lighten these little streaks that are coming off the back side of this. I can tell that it's in the dark and it won't be as bright as this part, but I definitely want to get those streaks to pop a little more. I guess you could make the argument that that's gonna take away from my leading line, but I don't think it's gonna take away that much. So this I'm gonna use luminosity masks for. So we're going to hit lights 1. Lights 1 includes these lines, as you can see, and the black parts here are the dark parts, but it's including a little too much for me, a little too many brights, and so too much brights. So I'm going to hit this levels button here, and what that does is it allows me to refine the layer mask. So we can add a little contrast Or we can add some blacks. Yeah, that's better. Let's get in there. Okay, hit OK. Now we're going to hit selection. And what that does is it doesn't apply that to the mask. It just is a selection with the marching ants. Even though you can't see the marching ants down here, it still selected it. I'm going to hit Command H to hide it so I don't have to look at the marching ants that are up here. Now with a white brush and probably a little higher opacity than 30%. Let's do 50. I'm going to come in here and just touch those spots up. I really want the water to look like it's moving. We're about to get a big blizzard and the wind's picking up outside. Alright. So, it was subtle. I think I'll probably end up adding more there later, but in the meantime, it's okay. And I'm going to make another selection here. This time we're going to do lights 2. Okay. Let's see. Alright. Now, I'm going to make another levels adjustment and try to get some more detail out of this rock wall and the grass and the bushes and the lighthouse. The whole area up here. So, we're going to... Oh, it added, because I had a selection made for for down here. Whoa, for here, because I had a selection made and I created a new layer, it applied the selection. We don't want that, so I'm gonna hit Command Z and then hit Command D to deselect it and then create another levels adjustment, levels layer, excuse me. And now we're going to zoom up here. And I'm a firm believer that, you know, the darks in the images should be dark and the light should be light. That's what got me into using luminosity masks, was HDR just was making the darks too dark. I'm sorry, the darks too light and the lights too dark. You know, it's not a very natural look. So this area over here is relatively dark, so we got to be careful. We're not trying to like get all the detail out of it, but what I like to try to do is I want to get the light parts of the darks to be lighter. So in this area where it's very dark, there's this little concrete house here. This side of that house I will lighten, let's say, or any of the rocks here that are gonna be getting sunlight, because the sun is on the right side going from right to left. So we want to kind of show that it's being hit by light and brighten it a bit. So we're gonna take the whites again and we're gonna slide it to the left. And you can see already that it's brought up a lot of detail here. I got another trick I can try to show you. Another way of blending. So right now, that's kind of what I was looking for, but it's gone a little too far in some of the dark spots. So we're going to go into layers. We're going to invert this so we can't see it. We're going to go with our brush, white brush, I'm gonna do 50% opacity and just come in and paint it. And I'll show you what I do to protect the darks in a minute. Now, with the Wacom tablet, you're able to be, it's pressure sensitive, so I'm able to be pretty gentle with my brush stroke, and that helps control the flow. So I also want to lighten this lighthouse. It's not going to be as easy, but we'll see. Oops. I accidentally selected another color. If you hit D, it'll go to default, and so you could be on any color you want. Right now, let's say I'm on black and black right here. Hit D, and it goes back to black and white. And again, X is to cycle through them. I try to do stuff freehand when possible, or at least start off freehand, and then, like, if I need to go clean it up using a selection, I will. So, for example, this I just did freehand, but I spilled over on the edge here a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to cycle to black paint, and we're going to make a hard opacity, and along this edge here, I'm going to click once and hold down shift and click again, and it drew, basically, you can't see it, but in the mask it drew a straight line down the edge and it cleaned up the edge. It's a very quick and easy way to do it. Using that same technique, I'm gonna come over here and hit this lighthouse with some with the levels adjustment to help lighten up the light side of the lighthouse. This is basically dodging and burning. It's just using levels instead of a brush or dodge and burn tool or whatever method you've used. Alright, and I definitely spilled over, but that's okay. I'm going to cycle back to black, and we're going to make it 100% opacity again, and a hard brush, and I'm going to click right on the edge of the lighthouse, and hold down shift, and click on the top of the lighthouse. And I don't know if you can see it, but here's where I bled over, and it's fixed. Perfect line. Now we want to get up here, add some brightness to the top. And this house here, and these houses, not so much the white one, but this one in particular is very dark. Very, very dark. And it's too dark. It's just like a blob when I look at the image. So we're gonna, oops, that's black. We're gonna go back to white brush, and we're gonna come in here, and that's too much opacity. Let's try 40. And we're gonna just come here and get the side. It doesn't have to be perfect. Alright. And we're gonna do the same thing with these houses. But if you notice, I'm only doing it on the side that's getting hit by light. So I didn't do it on this side of the house. I didn't do it in this little spot here. I didn't do it in here, but that's not to say that I won't, because it is very dark in there. That's better. Let's turn that on and off. So, it also looks pretty flat, though, too, here. You know, we went into the darks a little too far sometimes in some places. So what you can do, and this may or may not work, is you right-click on it and you go to Blending Options. And this is called Blend If down here. These are your Blend If sliders, and we're going to be dealing with the slider that says this layer, and that's the layer that we're working on, the levels layer. And when you slide these from one side to the other, so if I slide the darks to the right, it eliminates the adjustment in the dark spots. So as I start here and I slowly go, the levels adjustment's being taken away. Now it has some really weird artifacting that happens, and like this weird like pixelation, and you can fix that by refining it. And if you see this little arrow here, if you hold down Option, you can split the arrow, and that allows you to feather the adjustment so it's not as harsh. That being said, I'm going to go back to the beginning here, and we're going to, because I only want to eliminate where this levels adjustment is happening in the darkest parts, I'm going to leave the slider to the left, the full triangle. I'm going to instead split it and just drag half of it. And if I hit preview, you can, it's subtle, and that's what I want. It's darkening some of this back up, which is okay. Maybe I'll go back a little less because I just want to, yeah, I like, maybe a little more. A little further. That's better. Alright, I'm going to hit OK. This double square on the side of the layer, that's how you know that there's been a blend if adjustment to it. I didn't realize that when I first started using them, and I would try to go back and edit something, and I couldn't figure out why the adjustment layer wasn't being applied to the whole image, because I forgot that I went in and used blend if. Blend if is a very powerful tool. Normally you get people that either use luminosity masks or they use blend if. Some people use both. I've been trying to incorporate blend if into my workflow more and more as I realize the potential for it. It can be a lot quicker for certain adjustments. When it comes to blending multiple images together, I prefer luminosity masks, but when it comes to dealing with like a local adjustment, I like blend if. It's pretty good. Let's see. I'm trying to remember what I did next in the original image, but I think I'm just gonna go improv because I know what I would do to it. I'm just gonna pretend I'm editing it again. Alright, so we've made a bunch of adjustments here. 3 levels adjustments that have done quite a bit. If I oops. I'm going to put them in a group just so I can turn them on and off. But those 3 levels adjustments have saturated the image. They've added local contrast. They've illuminated parts of the image. They've darkened parts of the image. It's really cool. If you ask me, though, this spot up here, which is the subject, or one of the subjects, I guess you can make the argument that the wave and the rocks and the interaction of it all is the subject. But it's still a little dark for me. So I'm going to name this Levels 1 because it's going to be my first set of level adjustments. Now if you come down, if you have TK, there's these 2 icons, dodge and burn. What they do is they create a transparent 50% gray layer. And I know that sounds like a mouthful, but if you click this one, you get a layer. It looks like a blank layer, but it's in overlay. And all right. So if you have TK, the way to make a dodge or burn layer is you just push that and bam, you got a dodge layer. If you don't have TK, you go to new layer and you right click, or no, I'm sorry. Well, you can go in here, edit, fill, and you go 50% gray, preserve transparency, and hit OK. And now this needs to go into overlay. And just so you know what the layer is, because it does look like a blank layer, name it dodge. Now you take a brush with low opacity. Usually if I'm going freehand and I don't have a selection made or anything, I will usually work between 5 and 10% opacity, maybe less sometimes. One stroke of it does a lot. So, and you want to build it up. You don't want to be doing like one thing and be like, all right, I dodged that. You want to do it. That was with like a 40. You don't want to go in like a 50% transparent opacity and just do one stroke. Instead, you'd rather do 10% opacity and just build it up. It's going to be a lot more smooth, and not that it'll be flawless, but there'll be less flaws. So I'm just going to go in and touch up some of the highlights with some dodging. This is basically what I did with the levels adjustment before, but I like to do it both ways because they kind of work differently. And with this, you can also color dodge, and so I can set this to a different color, and I'll show you that in a little bit because that comes up later. But we're going to come up here, and we're going to dodge that. Kind of like it. There's a fisherman's statue monument thing that they have there. I don't know. I like how it's kind of silhouetted, but I want to add just a little bit of light on the bow of his little rowboat. That way it looks like it's getting hit with more light than the back of the boat, the stern. Okay. Let's see. This Montauk used to be a fort too, and this is an old piece of the fort that's fallen into the water. Big concrete slab. And we're getting there. We're getting there, folks. Alright. Let's see. So, as you can see, the front of this rock is being hit with light. I want to kind of emphasize that, and I'm going to kind of make it look as if the light is hitting the top just a little bit, too. And maybe, like, in through there. We're going to do another dodge layer. Again, I showed you how to do it, but new layer, gotta edit, fill, 50% gray layer, preserve transparency, and you can go into here and change the blend mode, but I just am in the habit of doing it here, overlay. Okay, so now we have another dodge layer, and the reason I made another dodge layer and didn't keep building on this one is because this one I'm going to do color. So I'm going to select the color, and we're going to go with a color that is already in the picture. Something like, so right now the brightest part of the scene is up here, and it's kind of like a pink light. I mean, it looks red on the color picker, but that's, that's pink. And that shows you what the sunlight or the natural ambient light color is, or close to it. You can then adjust it if you want it to be a little lighter. If you're dodging, I suggest keeping whatever color you do in the top little section right here. You don't want to be dodging with dark red. So this light peachy pink sand color I like. So I'm going to hit OK. And we're going to come into here and build it up. Alright, so it's subtle, but I like it. This one's gonna be it's tough to dodge or lighten surfaces that are black. Like black is black. It's not gonna become white no matter how much you lighten it. But you can color it a bit. Again, I'm only doing this on the light parts of the rock. I'm not doing it, I'm not trying to lighten the whole rock. I'm not trying to lighten back here, really. I'm trying to lighten the front where the sun is hitting. And, if you think you went too far, which I'm guilty of sometimes, you just bring back the opacity over here. And I think I went a little far, so I am going to bring it back to, 70 or so. And let's see. I think I want to work on the sky a little bit. It's beautiful, I like it, but I think I want to get a little more contrast out. So, make a new levels layer, and we're going to play around with these sliders until we get something close to what I like. we want the lighthouse to pop out from the sky behind it. And I think if I darken the sky, at least in this part of the image, the lighthouse will pop out a little more. I definitely am going to have to lighten the lighthouse even more. It just does not pop enough to me right now. So we're going to... let's see. That's actually kind of what I'm talking about. But yes, this is totally overblown here. So I'm gonna invert, and we'll start doing it freehand, but we may so this is all done. I'm at 30% opacity. I was at 30, now I'm at 20. You know, you want it to be subtle again. You're trying to build it up. I'm trying to be careful. Like, I want to get this section, everything over here except the brights. And I could do that with luminosity masks. But because I'm assuming some of you don't have it, I'm trying to do some of this freehand. That's a pretty big difference. I mean, the sky looks a lot better. There's more color in it. The lighthouse definitely pops and has some more dimension. But let's take a look at our shadows. They're not too bad, but I think we're going to do what we did earlier and go into blending options, and we're going to use the blend if slider, and we're gonna split the sky and drag it to the right just a little. Maybe that's not enough because I'm not seeing much of a difference, so a little more. That's better. It's very subtle, but if you look around these shrubs and stuff in here and on the dark parts of the sand here, you'll see a difference. All right. So now we are going to add some Orton effect. Orton effect is a technique that adds, there's a million different ways to do it. I've learned a few of them, and I recently learned a new method by an amazing photographer, Mark Metternich. He had a YouTube video where he showed his method of doing the Orton, and I thought it was a really clean method that has a lot of control. It's basically you're blurring parts of the image to add that kind of atmosphere and feeling to it. It's very popular these days, almost a little too popular. It does not work in every image. Don't do it in every image. But shots like this, it does work. It works really well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to select all our layers and Command Option E, and that does that stamp visible, and so that creates a layer, a merged layer. And we're going to go into here, and we're going to go Image, Adjustments, Levels. And when you do Image Adjustments, Levels versus creating a levels layer, you are doing it to a pixel layer. It is going to be destructive. You can't go back and change it as easily. Whereas all the other levels we've been doing, I can go back and tweak them. So this is different, but it's for a reason. So here you're going to go to your output level, and we're going to drag this guy up to about 70, let's say. Maybe a little less. 65, let's say. Okay. And now we're going to go into overlay or soft light. Both are different. Soft light I like better for this. They're very similar, but they are different. So, it's kind of up to you on that. And we're going to go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I think I want to do around 60. The amount of blur you give it is dependent on the resolution in your camera. This is a 42 megapixel image. I mean, it's been cropped and manipulated a little bit because it was 3 images originally. But there's enough resolution there that I know that, 42, I know that I need a certain amount of Gaussian blur. If you do a different method of Orton, that number 65 or 70 or whatever can be completely different. It depends on the method you use. So now we're going to right click and go into blending options, and we're going to, what Orton does is it saturates the image quite a lot, as you can see, and it adds some contrast, and you tend to clog up your blacks really easily. So we're going to go into blend if, and we're going to slide this to the right, and you can see this is a really good example of seeing where it's starting, like where it's affecting and not affecting. Obviously we have this really ugly thing going on, and the way you fix that is hold Alt or Option and split the triangles apart, and you feather it. And so you pull one in one direction, one in the other, and it's really to taste. I think I want to keep it a little more out of the blacks. So, let's see what that's like. Alright, so this is a very subtle Orton I just added. If I wanted it to be more, I can go back into blending options. Oh, come on. And I can readjust these. I think I do want it to be a little more. So sometimes I have to start from the beginning and move the triangles back to the left and go up again. And some people don't like that Orton saturates the image so much, the Orton effect, and using this method that Mark Metternich teaches, you're able to control that more. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's very blurry right now, but we can fix that. So we're going to, what I like to do, which everybody has their own technique. Some people like clarity like clarity for this, but the Orton, because you're blurring everything, you lose detail and a lot. You also can get these really unpleasant halos, which kind of looks like it's happening, but I don't see it actually. I don't know. It's not in my original image, but you want to be careful because if you go too far, you'll get these weird halos that happen around points of contrast, such as the lighthouse or hard edges, the lighthouse in the sky, or something like that. It's starting to happen, which is again why I'm going to go back in here and adjust it again, because the more I get it out of the darks, the less it'll have that effect. Okay. Alright, so now we blurred the image, now we need to get some detail back because we lost some detail. We didn't lose it, we just got to recover it. So I do this using Color Effects Pro and using tonal contrast. It's another method of adding micro contrast. I like how you have a lot of control over it. So in tonal contrast, the defaults are way too high. So we're going to back those all down to 0. Now we're going to go bring this up. So this is the highlights. So we're adding some micro contrast to the highlights, midtones. And I mean, you could do 10, you could do 8, you could do 6. It really depends on the image. I usually keep it around 9 for all of them. And it brought back a lot of detail in the image. It's hard to see in Color Effects Pro what it's doing because it takes such a long time to render the filter. But we're going to hit OK and I'll show you on the layer. Okay. So let's look at this sand here. So that's without tonal contrast. With tonal contrast. So it did a really nice job getting some detail back. If you do not have Color Effects Pro, I'm just going to hide this layer. What you can do is you stamp visible again, so you highlight all the layers and hit Command Option E. And again, this layer, the tonal contrast layer, we just turned off, so just ignore this. This is the new layer with the Orton, but no tonal contrast. So we're going to go into Filter, Other, High Pass, and you can do all sorts of different numbers for this. I wouldn't go above 15 tops. I mean, you could do 2, you could do 10. Tony Kuiper, his action for this, for the high pass filter, is 10. And go into here and do overlay, and you can see it added detail back in quite a lot, a little too much if you ask me. So you can just back it down, or you could redo the filter at a lower number, but because I like tonal contrast, I'm gonna stick with tonal contrast. I do see it's making, let me delete that. The tonal contrast is making some of the darks a little too dark, but I think I'm okay with it for now. So what we're going to do is, let's say you weren't happy with the saturation that the Orton effect caused. This is what's really cool about this method of Orton, is this layer is the Orton layer. This is our detail layer. We're going to stamp visible, so we're going to highlight those two layers. Command Option E gives you a new layer of these two merged, and we'll turn these off just for now. And this merged layer that we just did, we're going to go into luminosity, and when you do that, it gives you luminosity, shows the effects of everything but doesn't affect contrast. So I can go, this is normal. That's without affecting the contrast. I mean the saturation. Saturated, unsaturated. Saturated, unsaturated. Saturated, unsaturated. So I do like the saturation in this case, so I'm going to delete that. But I do think the picture is becoming a little too blue. So the way we're going to fix that is we're going to make a curves adjustment. And there's lots of different ways to do this. And there's a million different ways to skin a cat. But we're going to make a curves adjustment, and we're going to go to the blue channel, and we're going to go down on it just a little bit. And so that little tiny adjustment just warmed up the whole image. And I like it a lot better this way. Next thing we're going to do is, because I did say that the blacks were getting a little too dark, on the back side of this rock down here and over here. I mean, if you zoom in, it doesn't look like anything's actually black, or I'm not clipping, but it's dark and there's no detail. When you view, depending on what this image is going to be used for example, if it's going to be used for social media or Instagram, you don't necessarily need to do this next step. I mean, so if you're doing social media, or it's going to be viewed on like a phone or something, the blacks tend to look darker than they actually are. So we're going to make a levels adjustment, and for this action you would need Tony Kuiper's, but we're going to make a darks mask. Oh, scratch that. Sorry. Make a levels layer. If you have Tony Kuiper's action panel, we're going to delete all the channels. That's down here, this red button. We're going to delete all the channels. And the reason we're doing that is because the Orton effect has changed the actual physical image slightly, but it's changed it. And so the masks that we were using that were in here no longer apply. Not in the same way, at least. So we're going to do a darks 5. Now it's generating new masks based off of the current image, whereas the masks we were using were the original image. So this is a darks 5. This is showing us the darkest points in the picture. I think we could even go to darks 6. That's more like it. These are the spots I was talking about where we're losing detail, like right up here, especially if this is going to be viewed on a phone. If this is going to print, I would probably not do this. So we're going to hit apply, and we're going to go, here's the thing, the adjustment sliders, and we're going to grab the whites, and we're going to go to the left quite a bit. And if you toggle on and off, you'll see what's happening. It is very subtle, but when your photo's done and you post it on Instagram, this will help protect the blacks from looking completely black. It very slightly raised the darkness over here. It does flatten it a bit, but it's okay when it's being viewed on a phone or something, or even on a computer if it's on like a website, we're basically done. There's a little noise that I'm seeing. It's fine for social media. If you're printing, this would be something you need to fix. Um, I also see some lens dust that I need to fix. But, anyways. So, this is also a Nick collection thing, but I really like using Define too. Define is a way to reduce noise. There's lots of different ways, but I like Define. It takes a minute, and it does it automatically usually. If you find out that it didn't reduce the noise in a spot that you see a lot of noise, you can then go in and adjust it. So, okay, it's done doing it automatically. It says automatic profile applied. Excuse me. These little squares are the sections that it's sampling the noise from. So, down here, I don't know if you'll be able to see, but you definitely will not be able to see this on YouTube. But if you look on the bottom right in this viewing window, there's a side-by-side comparison of before and after, and it did a really nice job removing the noise. I don't necessarily think it needs all of these, like this one on the Lighthouse. I think I'm going to delete because it's not, there really isn't much noise there. So you select it and then you hit delete. Likewise, if you felt like there was noise in a spot and it didn't fix it for you, you can click on this little square and, drag it over your section. It only needs a tiny bit of information to sample. And then you're going to hit measure noise and it will do the same thing again. But this time it will have taken into account wherever you drew the square around. We're going to hit OK. And we're really on the last step now. The last step is sharpening. Depending on what you're doing with it, I sharpen differently. So for Instagram or whatever, Facebook, I will use a high pass filter like we did before. I showed you after the Orton effect. So to do it for sharpening though, I hit Command J, that duplicates this layer, and I go to filter, other, high pass, and I usually, 10 is way too high for this type of sharpening, so I will do like 1.5, let's say. And you probably can't see it on YouTube again, but give it a second, it'll go gray again. There we go. There's little bits that you can see the edges of like these rocks right here. And what high pass filters do is they find edges, and it only applies the sharpening to those edges. So we're gonna hit OK, and we're done. What do you think? No, I'm just kidding. Last step, go into your layer mode and change it to, a lot of people have different preferences on this. I use overlay. Some people use soft light. Some people use linear light. You can play around with it. Each one has a different effect, slightly different. And depending on what blending mode you want to use, you may have to change the number that you put in the high pass filter. So 1.5 wouldn't work, let's say, if I use linear light as the blending mode. But for all intents and purposes, overlay is fine. At this point, you can downsize it to 2048 and 2048 pixels in the height, and send it off to Facebook or Instagram. Adversely, if you wanted to print it, you would do some more work, but we're not gonna get into printing. So anyways, I hope I This is my first time doing this. I hope somebody learned something. If you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer them. And I will be doing more of these if there's some feedback. That's good. Thank you. Bye.